So once again, it's my pleasure to host Claudia Toenz, CEO of HeartForce Korea, in a special lecture today. She's actually originally from Switzerland, and HeartForce is a innovative cardiac digital healthcare startup with a device and ways to predict and hopefully prevent heart disease. She'll talk about those details. And she's graciously provided her time and interest to share the HeartForce story. I've also asked her if she has time and interest to talk about her personal entrepreneurship story, as well as the Korean startup ecosystem and perhaps even the Swiss startup ecosystem more generally. And Claudia, as I mentioned in the hour preceding, we had a discussion about ecosystems, the Korea ecosystem for innovation. We had a discussion about Israel as well, some historical discussion about developments east and west and so forth. So that was a little bit background for the lecture preceding your special presentation. So the students are very engaged, they're very innovative, and I know they're very interested. So feel free to make this an engaged discussion. I'll stop sharing here, and without further ado, please welcome Claudia, and you may start. And we're also recording, as you know. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Professor Ogan, for this nice introduction, and a very warm welcome to all the students this morning. And I'm looking forward to share with you my experience on the way as an entrepreneur, but of course also the twists and turns these journeys usually have, and the ups and downs. And feel free also to interrupt me. This will not be like a monologue. I'm really happy to exchange with you. And if you have questions, just raise your hand or in the chat box. I think Professor Gurel will help me if there's some questions appearing there, and we will take it from there. So let me start, and I'm sharing my screen. So can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. All right. So I'll be honored that I can also talk to you, as maybe from my past, and introducing myself shortly. I was always wishing I could have this insight with companies and people who are leading companies and sharing their experience, also to give me guidance when I was young. What would be the future? What's laying out there ahead? What could be the roads I'm gonna take? And as many times the roads will not be as even or as clear in the beginning, but the more you will exchange and the more you will talk to people, you will find your own path. And this is also how, from my path, when I was thinking after my studies, I usually knew what I didn't want it to do, but I wasn't really clear about what I wanted, what was my purpose and my passion. So initially, my path was more in the corporate world. I studied economics, and from my parents, who were more a bit like entrepreneurs or practitioners, I call it this, more on the practical side, it was not so, it was rather unusual in my family that I would study. So after my studies, I experienced some roads in the financial, and then some roads in the fast consumer consumer goods industry. And then the twist went into the logistics, and starting with big projects. and on levels where I had to work with many, many different departments. And then I found out actually that I would love to have more interactions and interfacing with different skill sets, with different departments, and also with different cultures, which brought me to work, and I was very lucky in that case, into many different countries and exchanging with many different people. And one of the projects I'm gonna introduce you today, this brought me, or later on, brought me to Korea. So on a peace mission, going with my husband to South Korea, and living now since more than 7 years here, I started last year this startup, which is already 5 years old. It's called HeartForce, and we are in the early detection of heart disease. Now, you would think, why Korea? Because as HeartForce, we started in Switzerland and in Canada, where we had a different, or we still have a different ecosystem than Korea. But there are many different points which are positive why we have chosen Korea. But let's start a little bit on a different pathway. So I will try, oops, it's not moving. Just a second. Oh, okay. So I will give you some insight on the Swiss startup ecosystem today, and I will tell you why Korea, and also about HeartForce as a startup. So let me switch to the ecosystem of Switzerland, and therefore I have prepared here this one. And can you see now the slide of this of Swiss Startup Radar?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, all right. Okay. Good. So what are some sorry, what are some criteria to become a startup and being successful? I'm gonna put that up. Right. Okay. So thinking of criteria to starting a company, of course, is one part looking at the teams who are working in a small business and what skills they have, and if you are really the person who wants to really go fast and take this practical chance, but also being not discouraged when things are not really going the way you would wish they're going. And looking at these skills, but also combined what criteria young and small enterprises as startups make them successful, and what is the basis for them. I have just put some slides together here from a startup radar, which has come out from Switzerland, quite new, and looking at some pros and cons and the situation in Switzerland. So most of our startups in the Swiss ecosystem who are successful are usually science or technology based. They have a science or technology based approach and focus on innovation. And third topic, of course, they need to be scalable. Their business model needs to be scalable and have ambitious growth plans. Most of them, and this is also valid for us, have an international approach when it comes to the market entry or market expansion. And of course, at the end, we all want to make money, so we want to have the return on the investment. In Switzerland, it looks a little bit maybe different in size. We only have, if I say only, 50,000 people working in startups. However, this is maybe not showing the full picture, as Switzerland is historically a country which has gone strong on the backbone of small and medium-sized enterprise. And of course, small and medium enterprise, they all started small, they started as startups. And from this perspective, maybe you can imagine the culture from in Swiss people or the Swiss market and talents are already going in the direction of startups. What is a bit different if you look at Switzerland ecosystem is when you think of the capital or people who are taking the risk to invest in startups. As of course we know many startups will not be the unicorns and will not be the successful ones. So the investment in startups in Switzerland is not really easy to find people who are investing it. There is, if you look at this part, a bigger chance to get money from the United States. Oops. Okay. If we look at the situation, how many new jobs are generated with startups who receive capital, you will see that the startups who receive capital from investors have much more jobs created compared to startups which do not have investors believing in them or receiving capital. Of course, that could be bootstrapped, or that could be companies who are just trying to get growth in a not such a fast track as they would have investors. And looking at the services or jobs generated with investors, you see in the B2B service, it's the biggest part, although software and finance services are falling up quite significantly. Non-for-profit, that would be the lowest end. And comparing this one with the European stars or not stars, we see quite well Switzerland is on a good track when we talk about innovation compared to other countries in Europe. What I want to maybe point out, what is not so easy at the moment for startups when you think about the crisis. Usually if startups get investment, of course they have a plan and a roadmap which they want to follow, and sometimes there are coming obstacles across your way. You might need to readjust your plans or your financials, but especially now in the Corona crisis, there are some additional challenges which are quite hard for these small enterprises. And here I just want to show you with the last survey done in these regards, we see there are many means to startups how they can maybe survive or readjust or pivot their strategy or plans for this situation. So most of the startups need to readjust their planning like midterm, or they get some support from the government when we could downsize the work or the working hours and get some financial compensation from the government. Of course, readjusting the budget would be a big topic as well. and pivot their business model I mentioned, asking for different financial support. And the last resort, hopefully for most of the starters, is like dismissing and downsizing their personnel. So in times, not only coronas, but these are topics eventually every startup which needs to think with ups and downs and readjusting their situation if a crisis comes. So there is a saying actually, always make time or have time for the unexpected. And I think this is not only valid in times like we have now in crisis, but also in our life. On this slide, I want to point out that you can see most of the financial supports when startups go ahead with their ideas is usually from friends or from people they know already quite well. This is not the case if you look at Israel, and I know you talked about Israel earlier. So compared to Israel, how they get financed, to startups in Switzerland and USA, Israel has much more institutional financing compared to the start of a company in Switzerland or USA. So this map illustrates this quite well, and that's actually also something where we in Switzerland have to pay attention. We see finance startups per 1,000 inhabitants. If you can see here, the red one, that's Switzerland. Still moving ahead, but some other countries are really on the fast track. If you look at VC investments, Israel, or UK, and also Sweden. Last but not least, I want actually to point out some important topics for you guys, because you are now in a phase or situation where you think about maybe your first jobs or your career, in what direction that will go. So looking how I was raised or grown up and studied, I always knew what I didn't want it, but I wasn't really so clear what I wanted. And that's why for myself, I started my university at University of St. Gallen, which has a rather economic background, but on the other hand, is the university for the education for small, medium enterprise. So it has a very strong startup and small business background and also network. Depending, of course, when we look at the situation and what skills in the future are needed, it goes maybe more into the science one, where the ETH is a very famous university in Switzerland, also where like bioengineering or algorithm, robotics, and these kind of topics are very high on the agenda and very successful. So this is a broad overview of engineers and the economy and ecosystem where the different universities specialized. And I'm pretty sure, and I know from experience in Korea, that this is also something where Korean university have their specifics, how they are gonna prepare the young people for the future. So now making the turn, and I guess with the time also just in the next 10 minutes, I'm gonna introduce HeartForce, and then let's have enough time for Q&As, and please interrupt me if you have questions. Okay. So as mentioned, HeartForce, a Swiss technology company, we are in the early detection of heart disease, and we are a digital healthcare company. Thinking of heart disease and of heart disease, you would think, wow, I'm pretty young. What do I have to do with heart disease? But maybe you have experience in your family or in your history of your family, something with a heart health topic. It is the #1 killer worldwide, and 20% of the global population develop heart disease over their lifetime. So every 5th person. And the shocking news, or it's not news, but the shocking reality is that heart disease problems, or most of the time, symptoms are not shown in 77%. So 3 out of 4 who have a heart disease, you will not see it, and you will not know it, and you will not feel it, unless you have a chance or a coincidence that you get to a technology either in a hospital or now something what we have developed for an easy and early detection if something is wrong with the heart. So why did HeartForce start with it? Our founder actually suffered a heart attack with years of 50 and was lucky to survive. Only 30% of people survive a heart attack. And this is where he started to think about what could be done to intervene at the early stage and finding out if the heart health is in a good path or not. Because he was actually an athlete, a very fit person, and no overweight, nothing, and it came out of nowhere. So this said, looking at the market, and now I'm gonna first to show you a bit the potential. When we go and start a company, we want to know, oh, is our idea or the problem we face and the solution we want to develop, is there a market? Because most of the startups and company fail. They're developing a nice service, a nice tool, but there is no market out there. So if we look at the market for heart topics, there are the first thing, if we look, what is the risk to develop a heart disease? So people with risk factors of heart disease is 1.9 billion worldwide. So as mentioned, every 5th person. And people who are already diagnosed with a heart disease, we're looking at the market of 500 million plus. And now narrowing this down from a service addressable market to a primary market where HeartForce wants to start with is people who have survived a heart attack, people who are really sensitive to the topic, and still we're looking at the market with plus 20 millions worldwide on a yearly basis. And the pie of the market, the pie is even growing. And if you look at people who have diabetes or hypertension, obesity, who have even a higher risk to have a heart disease or to develop a heart disease or heart failure. So what we have developed is a tool or a product which is tiny enough, like my hand or even smaller, which you can put to your heart and analyze the information of your heart health. And this is the first tool on the market which we're not gonna need a mini surgery, so it's non-invasive, and we can monitor or screen our heart and see if there is everything in order. So on this slide, you can see we're taking the heart rate. We're looking from a technology in ECG. I will shortly explain that afterwards, and SCG. So it's really easy, and it's combined with an app to use it anytime, everywhere. So the solution is a product which actually can save lives, because it's early detection, it's early monitoring, and everybody can use it. Cost effective, is compared to tools in the hospital, is less than 1% of the cost. This tool, we are selling it for less than $300. So it's not something which eventually is only up to a group of people who could afford it, or who are insured, who have the means of insurance protection or coverage, but also starting people raising awareness for their self-care, prevent and manage their heart health. So what we do, we are capturing information with 3 different technologies, and we are transferring the information with algorithms in the background, and bringing back insights and information for the, I don't want to call it patient, but for the people who are sensitive to know about it, or who have already experienced a disease. But of course, this could go or can go much further, as eventually also the whole healthcare market, or the whole awareness of people, is shifting, especially now in COVID times, where people don't want to go and visit a hospital, or rather staying away from risk situations, and eventually have the need, and more have the need to find out, or to find solution which could help in a remote or untapped situation. So in one way, we of course need to think also, what do we market? Our tool actually can do a lot, and can do much more than the conventional ones, which are more geared in the wellness market, like the Apple Watch. So our tool is a medical grade tool. We have done clinical studies. We have not received in the country we want to go and start selling the FDA approval. That's our next milestone. So we actually can detect coronary artery disease. That's when the veins have plaque inside, and the #1 killer. But of course, we can also detect other heart disease. But when going to market, it is specifically also important to think about, how do you communicate, and how do you communicate with your target market and patients, or patients in brackets, people who are health sensitive, or heart attack survivors. So this is quite a tricky one. I'm not going into detail now, but a very important one. How do you communicate with your B2C and your B2B? Our target is to go and launch with CardioPro, that's the name of our tool, in 2022, on 2023 in a bigger way. And with our team in Vancouver, Switzerland, and now Korea, trying to stick, or trying to step in the market, I should rather say, step in the market, and primary taking Korea as a clinical or test bed to find out how this would go, and then prepare for US and Europe. Now, why Korea? I want to just take the last 5 minutes and want to explain why Korea, as this doesn't really sound so obvious. Okay. Can you see my screen, Korean health news?
Not yet.
No, not yet.
Not yet, okay. Okay.
Yeah, now it's working, I think.
Okay, okay, great. Okay, I'm just, oops. Okay, so why Korea? We came this year to, or last year, sorry, to Korea with a startup challenge, and that leads me now to the startup and ecosystem here in Korea. Korea for us was at first sight not such a obvious target market. And one thing, Korea is focusing a lot on their #1 killer on cancer, as not yet there, but actually predictions show that shortly also Korea #1 killer will be heart disease. And looking at the situation in Korea, we also see in the telemedicine or in globally speaking, the healthcare or the future of healthcare, of digital healthcare, is lacking behind. However, we were thinking, what could we benefit, or how could we actually have a win-win situation with Korea, and looking at our re-strategizing with COVID and with the tumbling stones or obstacles which were in our way, especially as we were focusing first on the US and European market, which were very, very hard hit by Corona and which actually brought us some problems. So we were looking what could we maybe pivot and look into a Korean market. Korea has a very good healthcare system in this regard on a very high level. And especially when we think of clinical trials, they have a strong track record. And we also see Korea as an option and test bed in a later stage and further expansion of our Asian market and taking this eventually from here. And of course, and this was maybe one of the major topics as we are thinking of the B2C market and having a commercialized e-commerce service, and knowing that Koreans are very tech savvy and many people, or a huge majority of the people, are using mobile devices. And this was another topic where we thought, oh, it could be a good chance, especially now with the deal, the big deal which the government has released and emphasizing the 5G strategy. So with this, I would like to close the presentation, and I would really be happy to open the discussion and answer questions which you have, with being it Swiss, Korea, startups, entrepreneurship. Very happy to answer your question.
Thank you very much, Claudia. We are virtual, so we don't do a lot of clapping, but I'm sure everyone is appreciative. So this is a very engaged class, and typically we don't do questions to the chat room, but they basically just raise their hand or talk. Some people may want to put their questions in the chat room, but anybody have questions for Claudia?
I have a question.
Okay, Junyu, Sung Junyu.
Okay. First, thank you so much for your talk. And I am also really interested in startup, and I am planning to go for a startup this year. And I want to ask, what was the biggest challenge to enter the startup challenge and getting a prize for it?
Mhm, mhm. So do I understand you want to apply for a startup challenge?
Yes.
Okay, okay. So do you have a product and an idea which you want to go about?
I do have products and I am planning to work on that, like make a lean canvas and like make the whole idea with my team.
Mhm,
Yeah.
mhm. Maybe what I can share from my experience is well, one thing, of course, uh, don't be afraid first thing to communicate your idea. Eventually, uh, is an idea is only as much worth as you will communicate and start and working upon, because people have many ideas and they just keep it in their book and never go about it. Well, first I want just to motivate that you do that. And second, maybe from my experience, applying or being chosen in a startup challenge. So there are different challenges. There are accelerator programs where you get mentoring and you will be coached along your pathway. There are also only pitching challenges where we only would pitch and tell about your idea. Important maybe is that first you need a team. I mean, it's about your team and your skills, what you can bring across. And of course, the idea which you, or the solution which you bring must be something which has a real benefit, a benefit to the people. And if competing, it means also, of course, this benefit needs to have a market, and a big market, and also scalable. So maybe my recommendation is, well, try it. Don't be afraid to try it. Even if there is not a first time success, it is actually the practice who makes the mediocre to the professional. So that is actually my advice. Of course, there are much more. If I can be of any help for you, don't hesitate also to contact me in person.
Okay. Thank you so much for your advice. It's really helping me. It makes me think a lot. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I have a question.
Mhm.
First of all, yes, thank you for your presentation. And as we talk about two different startup ecosystems, one's like Switzerland, like in Europe in general, and one in Korea, can you say like some big differences, where to start, where we can find some challenges, and where advantage and disadvantage compares us to ecosystems?
Yeah. Maybe one thing where to start. I could imagine you want to gain experience in these regards. So where to start, I could very much recommend you to apply eventually maybe for an internship in a startup. I know the startup challenge which we have participated, that's the Korean Grand Challenge. They are every year looking for interns. I myself have worked now with interns in this challenge, and experience very, very positively. I can learn from them, and they can learn from us as a startup. So that could be an option. On top, of course, as we just heard from your colleague before, if yourself have an idea, starting with a startup, or let's say with canvas or starting business models and exchanging that with your colleagues, and also of course testing it. And testing means eventually not only asking your friends, well, would you buy my service, or would you spend money on it? There are different means and tools which you could go about that, and there are also many platforms about this. One is Restrategizing.com, where you find a lot of information about Canvas and testing it in the market. And your question also comparing a Swiss ecosystem or Korean ecosystems. Well, I would say one big difference is maybe Switzerland is very small. I experience Korea as a much bigger ecosystem. However, I cannot really say it's more active or more proactive. That is maybe also a bit to the reason I'm coming from abroad into the Korean ecosystem, where you guys maybe have a lesser barrier from the language or from other points of view. However, at the end, it's always like maybe finding a friend or somebody who can connect you with it. Something which I could recommend you to join or to look into is there is a Slack channel. It's startup, Soul Startup, I think it's called. Just a second. Slack channel, Soul Startups on Slack, and they always looking also for interns. They have a job board which you can look, or they exchanging events, virtual events or also face-to-face events. There is the Google Startup Campus in Seoul. As I'm usually in Pangyo, the startup valley, so there are many pockets or pockets in this ecosystem here in Korea, which you guys can tap into it as well. If it's just also participating and listening maybe to a startup, talking about the experience and connecting in with other colleagues in the network.
Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
May I ask a question? First of all, yeah, thank you so much for really informative presentation, and I'm so excited to hear about the ideas and your experience. And my question is that, like, as we know, the 2020, like, we had a really big crisis, like COVID-19, and we still have lots of issues with this. And as far as your like companies like a HeartForce is in the field of healthcare, and who was really curious about, like, let's say the healthcare system is becoming like a trending, like a dominant field now, and government doing a lot for researches and innovations in this field. And could you please share your ideas about what will be the market demand, or what will be the, let's say, the demand from the governments for such products, like such as your product HeartForce in 2021 or future? Thank you in advance.
That is a very good question, and honestly, if I would need to answer it for 2021, I'll be positive and negative in a way that yes, there is a need. Yes, I'll see that if I look at Korea and the big size and amount of money they put in the market for specifically now in general digital solutions. And with COVID, there is a big need of digital solutions. If we think of remote working place, if we think of eventually new system to transport or to conquer or overcome logistics problems, if you only think about all the the e-commerce and deliveries, home shopping, which have exploded during Corona. Or if we think about the main topic in the healthcare system, where we have maybe not enough healthcare personnel, or we have not enough educated people in ICUs, in intensive care departments. And sometimes it's not only the technology which can actually solve the problems we have. There is also the situation of the skilled people, or of the people really working together in an efficient and effective way. So there are many, what I want to say, there are many aspects to it. It's not the putting the money into the system and the technology as such. There also needs to be a mindset change. And with a mindset change, from my experience, usually is not really going very fast, especially if we think about elderly or mid-age generation. Maybe your generation, you are born, you're the digital natives, you're born with that. But changing, and with COVID, of course, things are accelerated, and I see that there is a positive move, and maybe also a very good field for digital healthcare companies, as we are now in the month and years to come. But on the other hand, there are also situations which are in disfavor of such topics, as there are also priorities. When you think of a crisis, usually in a crisis, money and also politics or investments are prioritized in ways which come first. And actually that was our topic in United States, as this was our first go-to market. Our clinical trials, basically, which were almost finished but not fully, have just been basically reprioritized. So with COVID, all COVID-related inventions or medicine or technology have put first. So yes, there are some very positive developments, but of course also some challenges, I will call it, which have been caused due to this situation.
Thank you so much for your answer. Yeah.
May I ask a question? First, thank you for your coming, and I want to ask, because as we know, people is always important in a company. So, how to solve the problem when there are arguments in your team? Because sometimes there are always many different ideas, especially in the beginning of a startup.
Mm-hmm. That is very well said. And eventually, you can say is not much different a startup to a big company. And I have worked in both. I have worked in very big companies, but it might be differently viewed or experienced. In big companies, you have bigger dimensions. But if you look at a team, being it in a startup or being it in a big company, at the team as such, there will be the phases of storming, norming, forming, and then you go in this really flow situation. It could be that you say, okay, I'll just meet from the beginning my founder or co-founder and maybe some other people. We are already in the flow because we understand each other so good and we have the same vision, the same purpose and everything. But provided things are not always nice weather situations, other aspects or characters come up, and of course there is one part is how do you manage, as you ask, if you have arguments or critical situations, and the other aspect of a team is in general, are we already in a forming or in a way where we know what are the guidelines or where we know how we're gonna work, and especially in startups at the beginning and later on, that needs to form a norm, and then you might have the good way to work. But on a daily basis and argumenting, I personally like argumenting, because I only think if you argument and have some disagreement, it will bring you forward. Then if you have a team together which everybody nods the head and thinks that's the way we're gonna go, that could be very dangerous. I think it's important to have different viewpoints, as long as you find a culture to work or to come to a conclusion or to an acceptance on and final decision. And eventually also very important in crisis situations, that you don't really drag your decisions or your final go about way too long, because every postponement has also a price tag to it.
Thank you.
May I ask a question?
So, yeah.
Firstly, thank you for your presentation, Mrs. Claudia. So I heard that you emphasized the importance of communicating in B2B and B2C. So could you briefly explain a few key points or any differences that we need to do focus on when we do a B2B or B2C?
Mm-hmm. So I would say B2C, I cannot really generalize now. I mean, we are now in the digital healthcare market, but if you think of B2C in fast consumer or in fashion industry or some other points, it might be different. But what we do see in communication in a B2C market, it has shifted significantly. Thinking of like fashion industry, which they work with influencer or with opinion leaders, and maybe looking at our product in the B2C market, we are not so far apart from this approach. At the beginning or at the very core, it is about trust. A customer wants to trust in a product or in a service which they buy. So one thing is about trust, and then thinking about how can we build trust? Are we building this through opinion leaders, through influencers, or are we building this just because we have get FDA approval or an approval from an authority who says, yes, this product is good? I think that's not enough. So there are different aspects where we need to think about the B2C communication, of course, also legal aspects, versus B2B market, where you would think what information or what product or service you're gonna sell. In our situation, this is probably more data driven. If you think about information which could be interesting for insurance companies, or information that could be interesting for professional healthcare or for governments to lower their cost. Because if you think in the whole system and the stakeholders who are part in a B2B setting, there are different benefits or different advantages or disadvantages you wanna share in your B2B market.
Thank you.
May I ask another question? I'm so excited about the product, like HeartForce, but my question is like, as you know, like the Korea is very advanced in technology, and so we have like a big, like a companies like Samsung and LG, who can produce like another product who can compete with HeartForce. So do you have any thoughts about like how HeartForce products can compete with other products in the market, maybe in the future?
Yeah, that's a very important question. Thinking of a startup, you need to think about the competitor, the risks. What are the risks to your business model, or what are the risks to your product as such? And of course, in Korea, it could be the big ones, but as similar it is in Korea, could also the big ones in the United States, and they have a much bigger power, of resource and financial resources. And yes, of course, this is a risk or something we are thinking about, that one day they could invent maybe something similar because they have the money and the resources to go about maybe much faster than a small startup. So of course there are things how you can protect your invention. With a patent you can protect, although if you think about technologies and algorithms, usually you cannot protect or patent an algorithm in that way. So it is, if you think of a fast mover, like first to market, there are different strategies. You want to go fast and you want to not really disclose or bring your advantage of maybe of a 5 years development into some hands which could be a danger towards your technology. But on the other hand, not moving ahead would be probably also not the right thing. So yes, you need to watch constantly your competitors, and also in communicating with different stakeholders or your investor, pointing out what is really your differentiator with competitors. I'll just bring an example eventually, like Airbnb, when they came into the market, nobody would probably think, oh, this could be a competitor to hotels or to the traditional overnight stay overnight industry. But one time goes by and people's mindset or people's acceptance is there, this could really change very quickly. So being abreast or being anticipative and looking at the market and competitive market is not always a direct competitor. You also need to think about indirect competitors. So yeah, we see, or we have this situation as well, and taking our measures.
Thank you very much, Claudia. We're approaching the end of the hour. Anybody else have a final question? Okay, thank you very much for sharing your insights about HeartForce, about Switzerland, about Korea, and you personally, and answering many questions from the students, Claudia. Really appreciate it. Let's thank her again. And I have recorded this. I'll be uploading it. I'll share it with the class, and I'll share it with Claudia as well. And as I mentioned, we also have another special lecture that I will share with the class on the ecosystem in Korea and so forth. I will put that link in the chat room. So once again, thank you very much, Claudia, and really appreciate it. And thank you to the students, and thank you again.
Well, thank you, everybody.